My very great pleasure and privilege to welcome Louise Kerby to our COSAPA Conversations. This is our third COSAPA conversation, and we will be getting to know Louise as we work through a few questions.
Thank you. Lovely to be
All
here.
right. Yes, so lovely that you could be here.
Hmm.
All right, so our first question is, please tell us a bit more about your journey into astrology, Louise.
Okay. Well, I left school and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I studied a BCom and I majored in accounts and economics, and I left university and went straight into advertising. And that journey led me into the media and the marketing world. And, I had a wonderful career in that space. And yes, it was fantastic to be part of the media. I joined the Independent Newspaper Group in 1994, and it was just such a fascinating time in South Africa's history. And to be part of that on the media side, and also to understand the media's role in South Africa, particularly in a new democracy like ours, with a very dominant party. So that was amazing. And then I kind of got to my mid-30s, and I was never really sure if I was meant to have children or not. And I did go through a phase of thinking, no, I do want to try. And then, of course, it wasn't happening, and I was getting more and more frustrated. And I was actually also getting frustrated with the media space, because it's sort of very negative and masculine. And I just felt like there was a part of me that couldn't find self-expression in that space. And so I had started studying other things in my spare time, and like Reiki and reflexology, and these were so fascinating that they kind of became almost more important than what I was being paid to do. So I then said to Brian that I wanted to resign, and I wanted to study, and I wasn't really sure how it was all going to pan out. And I thought it was just such a crazy thing because I didn't have a reason to resign. I mean, I didn't have children at home to look after. So, it's like it was almost needed to give myself permission to do that. Anyhow, and so I then, studied more, and I was into aurosoma and tissue salts and polarity therapy, and then the woman that I was studying polarity therapy with, she was also an astrologer. And so a few of us were asking questions about that. Next minute, I was around her dining room table, once a week on a Tuesday evening for 7 or 8 months. And it was absolutely fascinating. But I would come home and I wouldn't be able to recreate anything for myself. So I then realized that this was the thing that was really grabbing me, and actually that I needed to study it properly. So I decided that I needed to study with Rod Suskin, and I made application. And of course, I missed the deadline for the year, the year ahead. And this was in sort of 2003. And actually, unbeknown to me at the time, astrology was going through this huge reawakening, in a sense, of rediscovering the traditional roots. And as things worked out, it was almost like quite a blessing that I didn't get into Rod's course that year, because I then made application the following year. And in 2004, when I started studying, he started teaching with the traditional rulers. Wow. So, sometimes things work out as they should, and we need to trust these processes. So, yeah, so I absolutely loved studying with Rod. I mean, at that point, it was in-person studying in the Mowbray Golf Club. And, there were 30 of us in the classroom. And by the time we finished, I think there must have been about 9 or 10. And it was just so wonderful to be given the opportunity again to study something that I was passionate about at that stage in my life, and yeah, and so, yeah, that was the start of my astrology journey.
Well, that is such a beautiful story, and I love how you honored the different twists and turns in the journey and saw that ultimately it was for the best to be patient, to wait another year. And yeah, what a lovely, lovely journey to astrology. And you also have the richness of understanding marketing, understanding the media, which many of us astrologers lack. We have to learn it. I'm finding it age 61. I'm starting to understand and study and learn about marketing, because I know nothing. So wonderful that you've got all that to draw on and bring to your astrology. Okay, so next question is, which zodiac do you prefer? In other words, tropical or sidereal? And which zodiac sign do you best relate to? And would you mind sharing your sun, moon, and ascendant, and any other special feature of your chart?
Okay, so I'm a tropical zodiac astrologer, and I like to use the traditional rulers. And but having said that, there's an enormously important place for the generational planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And yeah, and and for me, dignity is also really important, because this helps us understand how these planets operate in a chart. So all of that information is really important. I'm a sun sign Scorpio. My sun's in the 7th house. My ascendant is Taurus, and I have a moon in Pisces in the 10th house, and it's conjunct Saturn. And that's also quite a blessing in a sense, because it speaks about empathy, but it actually also gives me boundaries, basically.
Very good.
I'm
that is
grateful
very
for that
helpful.
Saturn.
Yes, yes. How lovely. How lovely that you see from both perspectives. And what would often be considered a challenge, you have seen and utilize the light side of that traditionally difficult planet. So beautiful, Louise. Thank you.
And actually also just interesting, because my journey sort of started more in the bodywork thing, but actually I found it quite difficult to separate myself out from the client energetically in the bodywork. And for me, it's a much more affirming process working with the astrology chart, because I can clearly see that this is your journey and not mine. And it's the photographic lens that allows me to explain to you your journey, and it's not for me to fix it, but it's for me to empower you to embrace your journey. And yes, we are full of all contradictions. There are difficult things and easy things, and we need to understand the complexity of things.
So true. So true. And so fascinating that on a physical level, that Pisces moon struggles to put the boundaries. And so you need to have the more conversational, intellectual, psychological, in that realm, you're fine. And so that is so fascinating. Wow. Okay, so next question is, Who are your heroes in the astrology space? They can be living or they can be from long ago.
So there's no doubt that Rod Susskind taught me the most. You know, I really value his teaching, and it was really wonderful to be you know, part of his class. But I was also lucky enough, you know, shortly after I finished my studies, Bipin and Nikki were organizing conferences in South Africa, and they arranged the most incredible lineup of speakers to come to South Africa. And you know, we were still flavor of the month then, so everybody wanted to come, you know. So I mean, you know, we had lectures by John Frawley and Bernadette Brady and Robert Zola and Robert Hand. And you know, so you know, that was also a fantastic experience, because suddenly these authors of books kind of like came to life. So you know, I have a large number of books on my shelf, and obviously what's changed since I suppose I started studying is there's so much more online now, you know, whether it's YouTube or Facebook or websites or, you know, all of those kind of things. You know, you know, I like to read and watch various things. You know, I love attending, you know, like Wade Cave's international conference. I mean, that's great for South African on Rand, because otherwise these things are quite expensive. But there's just no ways that you can actually stop learning, because there's so much material out there, you know. I love getting a global perspective. So I like tapping into, you know, somebody like Merriman, who's very sort of financial. But I also am not restricted to just astrology. Do you know, I'm fascinated by Veda Austin's work of the consciousness of water. I really love listening to a wellness doctor in the UK, you know, Dr. Chatterjee, you know, and he just talks about important things of life, you know, which is movement, sleep, nutrition, and you know, and so the purpose of all of these things, and you know, and healing, that's a conversation that I'm really love. And I think astrology is really powerful in helping people heal. And you know, somebody like Gabor Mate, you know, when the body keeps score, and his sort of understanding of trauma and how we need to heal. And I think for me, you know, the space created in an astrology consultation is incredibly sacred, and the insights that astrology can give a client are incredibly deep, and you can get enormous amount of insight in a 90-minute session. And you know, old Gabor Mate speaks about, you know, the fact that trauma is our response to what happened to us. And if we see trauma like that, we have a possibility of healing. And that resonates very strongly with me. And so my sort of approach is always about empowering clients through understanding, you know, the chart and the karma, but also, you know, I like to speak a lot about isness. You know, the chart just is. It is our karma, it is our fate, but these planets have positive and negative expressions, and we need to understand these things completely. And we absolutely have choice. But, you know, what the chart says is that there will be speed humps in the road, and we need to choose how we go over those speed humps. But no amount of positive thinking is going to avoid the speed hump in the road. So, and we also need to understand that, you know, we're not different from nature. And I often say to my clients, you know, like a rose bush sometimes needs to be severely pruned to blossom. Sometimes we do too. And there's absolutely no doubt that our greatest learnings happen through difficulty. And but there's such potential in that, which is awesome.
Beautiful. So again, you are looking at the challenges as offering us something to expand our consciousness, expand our skill set. And yeah, beautiful. What a fabulous way of looking at things. And then just to clarify, by Bipin, you're talking about Bipin Prague, is it?
Yes,
His
yes.
surname is Prague, and
Nikki also.
Nikki, there we go.
Also.
So, and Nikki is the fertility lady now in
That's
the
right.
UK.
That's right.
Fertility
Yes,
astrology, yes.
that's
So
right.
you're very privileged to have been able to meet up in person with
Yes,
those great astrologers.
yes.
Fantastic.
Mm.
All right. So do you have any words of wisdom and inspiration for aspiring astrologers?
Well, I would say that don't be afraid of difficult conversations. I mean, the reality is that people are coming to us because they're struggling with something. And it's really important to be able to use the chart to help them, find direction and try and sort of unpack things. And also, don't be afraid to ask the client questions based on what you see in the chart. You know what I mean? So find gentle ways of tackling difficult things. And I mean, it's definitely, informed by my own experience, because as I was saying, I was never really sure whether I was meant to have children. And I started studying astrology at the same time that I was having fertility treatment. And, my knowledge wasn't great in the beginning, but it became very clear to me, as my knowledge grew, that I mean, children are always going to be, an important part of my journey. I mean, I have Uranus and Pluto in the 5th house and the ruler in detriment in the 8th, conjunct the South Node. So, it wasn't an easy path. And, there's no way to sugarcoat that. It's tricky and it needs to be addressed, because actually it was enormously liberating when I realized after a termination that my journey was about letting go and embracing a different journey. And because I knew that that was right for me. And, somebody else might have made a different, choice under different circumstances. But I think that's what's so powerful of, around understanding karma.
And what shows in the chart.
And
So
what shows in the
it can
chart,
take
and
away, yes.
yeah, and so yes, that experience fundamentally affects how I practice, because I know that you cannot shy away from difficult conversations.
Yes, and your chart indicates a difficult conversation was required, would have been required around having children. So that is so, for me, that's one of the great beauties of our astrology, is that it's this mirror in which we can see a more objective version of our life, and it can take away so much self-blame, all the negative self-emotion things that we can get into by just having a look in that, and especially if someone else happens to help us look in the mirror. It's hard to look in our own mirror often, because it's hard to be
Absolutely.
completely unbiased about our own stuff.
Exactly.
So yeah, brilliant. That's fabulous, fabulous, Louise. All right, so which teachers, which teachings and books do you draw on most in your practice?
So I mean, natal astrology is my passion. I really love people's stories, and yes, and it's also I mean, I'm married to a twin, and I actually had a twin in in consultation this week, and it's often interesting for astrology because twins' lives are not necessarily the same, but the charts are the same. And so it does also once again highlight, particularly as you move into adulthood, you know what I mean? You choose different partners, and at any time we can, make choices. And, so if it's a Saturn thing, it's about taking responsibility, or else we can feel blocked and stuck, you know what I mean? So how are we engaging with that? Yeah, so people's individual stories are definitely, my passion. But as I said, my background was the media. So, I'm really interested in current affairs, and I really like big picture thinking and patterns. And I mean, this is one of my favorite books,
Me too.
the world horoscopes. Yeah, so the big cycles definitely interest me in terms of the sort of like global picture. I mean, I do
Understanding our
like
world.
exactly, understanding the world, and particularly now, you know what I mean, when things feel very sort of upside down. It's kind of like comforting to know that there is some order, even though
Mm.
it's not looking like it. So I find that, enormously comforting. And I love, looking back in history, and, because history repeats itself because cycles repeat themselves, so I'm always interested in finding those patterns, what are the patterns? Yeah.
Really?
And yeah, and I mean, I actually sometimes love to have fun with, big sporting contests, to decide who I think's going to be the winner,
Really?
but that's just for fun, basically. Yeah. Mm.
Yes, but it is astrology. I mean, John Frawley has
Yes.
a whole book called Sports Astrology,
Yes,
where
which
we
I've
can
got.
learn exactly. Yes, me
Yes.
too. And
Yes.
years ago when I was studying with Rod, I'm not a rugby fan, but my partner is, and so I predicted quite a few of those international matches correctly, much
Mm.
to my and my partner's surprise. So yes, it's fun. It is fun. I mean,
Yes, it's
Frawley
fun.
actually did it as a bit of a profession. I mean, because in
Mm.
in Europe and UK, it's a sport gambling is a whole, the whole
It's a thing. Yes,
recognized
it's big business.
financial activity,
Mm,
a
mm, mm,
business.
mm, mm,
Exact.
mm, mm,
I
mm.
think it's arrived here. I think it's not really
It
part of
definitely
my
is. You just have to look at who's sponsoring the sports teams, Hollywood bets, etc. Yeah. Mm.
right, right. Okay, and so next question is, which planet are you currently relating to most and why?
I would say Saturn, because I've actually just, experienced my second Saturn return, and Saturn's opposing that, Pluto and Uranus in my fifth house. And I have found a way to be involved with other children in my life, for example, like educating my domestic's child. And
Ah,
but what I've really felt quite strongly is that responsibility is now done, and that feels good. And I'm ready for that responsibility to end. Yes, and he passed his grade 12 exams, so it's all good. Mm, mm,
wow. And given that, in my understanding, first Saturn cycle is about various levels of authority, second Saturn cycle is about the responsibility. So wonderful that at the end of that, you wrap that all up. And
mm,
third Saturn cycle, which you're now entering, is about wisdom. So
mm,
you can really, really
mm,
flourish in terms of all the wisdom that we have to share, because I'm also
mm,
I'm also in my wisdom years past my second Saturn return. So
mm.
that's fabulous. Makes a
Yeah,
lot of sense.
yes. Mm.
All right. And next question is, what astrology services do you currently offer?
So yeah, mainly birth chart astrology. Yeah, that's my passion, but I love writing, about current affairs. So I'm always, looking at things and yeah, that I put on my website or my Facebook page or my Instagram page. And yeah, it's just something that's impossible to never stop learning. Do you know what I mean? And yeah, it's a wonderful thing. Yeah,
You'll never be bored.
never. Mm.
And then also in terms of your natal, you do birth charts, but I'm sure you also do like predictive 1 year look ahead or further
Yes,
look
so
ahead.
I look at everything, the Fedarias, the perfections, the progressed moon, the solar arcs, the solar returns, everything. And when I work with a client, I'm often looking backwards before I'm looking forwards, because I want to explain to them how they've arrived at this point. And I want them to understand the flow and cycles of their own life. You know what I mean? So particularly if somebody's like my age coming, I want to go back and show them what that progressed moon was doing, 28 years ago or whatever. And
Mm.
and so to help them recognize the pattern and the theme. So yeah, I do a lot of that. And yes, I mean, it is very much about prediction, and it is about understanding that timing is really important. But it's important to understand the promise of the birth chart, because it will unfold, have a natural way of unfolding in and of its own time. But it also can't deliver on something that's not promised, so that's why it really is so important to get that understanding up front, and then to look at what's important now. And as I always start my consultations saying that this is a conversation, don't wait for questions at the end. The astrology is going to guide the conversation. And we're going to look backwards and forwards, and in a sense we're trying to build a case for something. So if we see something indicated once, it's a possibility, twice it's a probability, and 3 times we can be more certain. So the more evidence we see in a particular direction that an area of life is important, then that's the focus. So it's interesting, because sometimes people are coming to ask questions about their career, but actually everything's saying you need to look at your relationship. You know what I mean? So the astrology will guide the conversation and the process. Yeah.
Brilliant. And I also remember you saying that you provide like a little summary, a written summary, which is
Yeah,
very helpful.
I do a lot of prep before I see a client, and I love writing. So writing is part of my understanding of it's like a puzzle, so I do all of that preparation before, and then after the consultation I will send my written summary, because I think it's important. And I have many clients that really value that summary, because there's a huge amount of information to absorb. And sometimes people just want to listen and talk, and they don't want to be writing furiously, and I want to be engaging with them. I don't want them to be distracted by writing. But I always say to them, if something resonates with you, write it down in your own words, but don't worry about dates and that. It's all going to be in the summary. And I think sometimes things only make sense in time. And actually, it's quite useful if you can go back and reread it, because then invariably it does make sense. You know, and it's also sort of tricky, particularly if you know, have a client, say, for example, who's desperately wanting to fall pregnant, and you can see that it's going to happen, but like not immediately, maybe in a year or two's time. So you're trying to sort of, you know, navigate that discussion to, you know, not let them lose hope, but to know that, you know, kind of like you need to be a bit patient. And so often when somebody comes, they have something in their mind and they're just listening for that. And the conversation is, you know, is very broad, but also very specific. And so it will address all these things. And you know, in some ways it's kind of like my summary is, you know, what I see, not what you heard. And
Brilliant.
sometimes not the same thing.
Yes. So it's another perspective, and it's a wrap up. And yeah, and it's your wisdom woven in to what's happening in the sky, which is really, really super. All right, so we've come to our last question, which is, won't you tell everyone how they can reach you and how they can engage your astrology services?
So I've got a website, Louise Kerby, Kerby, and I've got a Facebook page, Louise Kerby, Traditional Astrologer, and I'm on Instagram, Louise Kerby, what is it?
It will all
Louise
be below
Kerby
as well.
astrologer. Yeah. So you can
Perfect.
find me in one of those 3 places. Yeah.
And you're on our COSAPA website
And
as
I'm
a
on the
special
COSAPA
ordained
website. That's
astrologer.
right. Yes.
So we'll put all those links down below, so anyone can just click on the links and get hold as well.
Perfect.
So thank you, Louise. It's been
Thank you.
so lovely chatting with you, and I wish you a beautiful day further.
Thank you. I'm just going to